All right, all. As we kind of near kind of the end of the semester of me teaching you new material, I kind of want to go over some concepts that, didn't really fit in other areas, or they may have been like a little bit more advanced than I wanted to get into at that point. So, this area is going to cover some special effects, including roto masking. We'll also get into 3D, like using 3D models, even though we did talk about 3D, but talking about 3D models and also using what are called brush strokes. So I'm going to open up exercise one, and I have a layer here. Okay. It's important that you have a layer to work on. You can go to new, solid, just make a layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint on this layer. Okay. Now, we've talked about painting before, or, I guess we didn't talk about it in this class, but, you can paint in programs like Photoshop or Photopea um, by using different drawing tools. If you go on and take like a Photoshop class, or a drawing class, some of you I'm sure probably use like Procreate or something like that. You can draw. Now we can also do something similar to that in After Effects. What we're going to do is we're going to have a layer, and you have to be okay with this layer being painted on. So this is why I'm just using a gray solid here. And I'm going to grab the brush tool, and this is going to allow me to paint on my object. Okay. So with this tool going on, so what I'm going to do is bring this layer into my composition window. The easiest way to do that is whatever layer this is, you can simply double click on it, 1, 2. And now that I have the brush tool, I can actually paint into it. All right. So let me show you this first exercise. We're just going to go through different things you can do. Once you grab the paint tool, you should have a paint option over here. And this is where you can, this is the color of my paint, my foreground color. So you can see I'm doing red. If I were to click this and switch it to another color, like blue or something like this to make it green, something along those lines. Okay. If you want to change the size of your brush, see where it says, I'm going to click this, and this allows me to choose from a preset brush. So these are all preset. Like I can click this and it's a certain type of brush, or I can click on this and it's a certain type of brush. We can also make our own custom brush. Um, this is the diameter would be the size of my brush. Okay, how big it is. So the smaller the diameter, the smaller the brush size, the larger the diameter, the larger the brush size. We're going to skip over angle and roundness for now and go to hardness. Hardness is how crisp your edges are. So you notice that when I click, I get really sharp edges here, okay? But if I were to lower this from 100% hardness to maybe 50, you can see that my edges are a little bit more blurred now. It's kind of like if I was using like a watercolor brush or something. If I set this all the way to 0, this is even more of a faded edge on my brush. Okay. I'm going to set this back to 100 just because it's a little bit easier to see. So the next thing is you might notice that for most of my brushes, I'm getting a solid circle. But sometimes you might want more of like an oval shape. So the way you can affect that is in your brushes panel, I'm going to change the roundness option from 100% to maybe like 50. And when I do that, you can see instead of having it's making my like the width to height ratio different. And so it's instead of having a circle, I have an oval shape. So you can see here I have an oval shape when I draw or paint, which will give me a different type of brush stroke. If you want to rotate that, so right now it's, it's longer than it is tall. I could switch that under angle. So if I made it to 90 degrees, it's taller than it is wide. Or I could even put it at maybe like 45-degree angle here. And I can paint. All right. So, try out different brushes. Try out, I'm going to go back to paint here and I can choose different colors. So I can literally paint on a layer here in After Effects, okay, which is kind of nice. After Effects isn't normally considered kind of a drawing program. I would say, something like Photoshop or Procreate or Krita or something like that. But you can do some very basic drawing here, okay? So now that we have that, let's move on to the next example. I'm going to open up exercise 2, and I have this brush stroke. Okay, so what I did to create this brush stroke is I made a new layer, like I did in my last example. I double clicked on it to open it up within to the composition window, and I used the brush tool to draw this kind of squiggly line here. What I'm going to do is if I play back my animation or my composition here, you can see that it's static. It doesn't move in any way, shape, or form. But anytime you make strokes, you can actually you have effects you can play around with. So technically, paint counts as an effect in the way that like maybe a Gaussian blur or something like that is an effect. And if I go under paint, this is my brush stroke or my brush one. And if I go under options, there's things like I could animate maybe the color of it or the diameter of it. What I'm going to do is play around with start and end. So start, the way it works is that 0 represents the start of when you drew your brushstroke, and 100% represents the end of when you finished your brushstroke. So what you could do is kind of do this to make an animated brushstroke. If I set n to 0, and I'm doing this at the beginning, and I'm going to go forward maybe 1 second and change this from 0 to 100, you can see it's following the contours of my brushstroke and making an animated stroke. All right. Like I said, other thing, that's kind of the one that you might play around with the most, but you could other play around other options. I could maybe change the color while doing this, and maybe in the middle, let's switch this from red to purple. And you can see while it animates, it went from red to purple. And maybe it's going to go from red to purple to yellow, making some psychedelic kind of lines there. And you can play around with things like diameter, the angle, the hardness of it. Okay. I'm going to do one from scratch just so you have a chance to, see what I'm doing here. So once again, I'm just going to make a new layer by going to Layer, New, Solid. And I'll call this, I don't know, New Brush Strokes. And I'm gonna double click on this in the layers to bring it up into the composition window where it says layered new brush strokes. And now I'm just gonna paint with it. So I'm gonna grab the brush and I'm gonna go under brushes and make a really big brush. Hopefully you can see that there. I'm just gonna make it about 50. Now the other brush stroke kind of went from left to right. This time I'll do right to left. Now it's very important that you don't let go of your mouse because I want to make one continuous brush stroke. If I were to kind of click and release, that would technically make multiple brush strokes, and that's not really what I'm trying to do here. But I'm just going to click and I'm just going to kind of go from left to right. You can see I'm kind of doing this kind of spiral thing here. Bibbity bobbity boom. Isn't that awesome? All right, I'm going to close this. And at the moment, you can see that when I play this back, oops, I think I started in the middle of that layer there. So I'll just drag that forward. So what I'm going to do is right now it's just a static drawing, kind of like the other one where it's not, animating. So what I'm going to do is go underneath here and I'm going to once again set the end to 0. Click on the stopwatch here. And let's go forward about 1 second and move it up to 100. And you can see it literally following the stroke that I just showed you. And then there you go. Okay. Now you'll notice that my new stroke here is actually blocking the old one. And that's because I'm drawing on top of the layer, the solid layer. And so it's actually blocking my layers underneath, which is not really kind of what I want. So what you can actually do, if I go under effect controls, there should be an option here, and you can probably get it through the effects control as well by double click, where it says literally paint on transparent, which means do you want the background to be whatever it's painting on top of to be invisible? Right now it's set to off. I'm gonna turn that on, and then now I can see the other layer, or at least I should be able to. Oops, except I'm in. All right. Same thing's actually kind of happening on this other one. So once again, I'm going to go under this stroke here, paint on transparent, and let's turn that on. And that's going to allow my brush strokes to not block layers that are below it. Okay. All right. So, we can make some animated brush strokes. That's kind of cool. I mean, maybe you'll have like maybe you have a graphic where you want like that kind of scribble effect, like the way a pen would draw something, or like a pencil or something. What I'm actually going to do with this next example is we're going to use the brush strokes to animate them and use them as a mask to something else. Okay. So I'm going to open up exercise 3. Oops. Looks like there's a disconnect between the footage. Let me fix that real quick. All right. So I got this light bulb here, and it's on top of this white background. And what I'm going to do, or actually what I already did, is you can see I have this animated stroke. Okay. And actually, I'm going to do this from scratch just so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Let's make a new solid. I'm going to call this brush stroke matte. And I'm going to double click on this. And I'm going to grab the brush tool and I'm going to make a relatively large brush, but not too large, maybe like 100. Maybe more like 80. I don't know. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a continuous stroke that kind of goes from the upper left to the lower right. So I'm going to start here and kind of do something like this, all in one continuous stroke, and then I'm going to let go. Okay. And I'm going to go back to my composition. And like with the last one, I'm going to go under paint. Let's turn on the transparency. And let's affect under stroke options. I'm going to animate this. So I'm going to once again, set my N to 0 at the beginning and then set it after maybe, 1 second or half a second to, 100%. The result is, this brush stroke gets drawn on top. Okay. Now it doesn't really matter what color the brush stroke is because I'm not actually going to use the brush stroke as paint, but rather we're going to use it as an animated mask. You might remember, I don't know, it's probably been a month or two at this point since we've done animated masks, but you remember that you can use the alpha of a layer to act as a mask. And so what I'm going to do is use this animated brushstroke to uncover. Oops, looks like I missed a little bit with the stroke there, but you'll get the idea. To uncover this light bulb. So I'm going to go under track matte, set it to the brush stroke here. Now it looks invisible, but what's actually going to happen is I'm going to paint in the effect. So, if you had something that was maybe like a little more illustrative or hand drawn, this kind of, drawn, you could do an animated mouse where it kind of moves subtly, but this is like a little more hand drawn. It's a little more organic. It gives it that kind of you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know if I was doing like a video where maybe it's comics or handwriting or something like this. This kind of effect is a really useful one and can really kind of give it that little extra to make it interesting. All right. So I want you guys to try that out. That was exercise 1, 2, and 3, please.